There is an old saying among the surveyors of the chalk country that a great name may be inked upon a map, but the truth is measured in the ground. For a fine gentleman will swear to whatever his eye is pleased to believe, and a rood of honest land will only tell you what it truly is. And the whole art of an honest survey is to know the one from the other. Prudence Ashcombe had copied the maps at Wexcombe for 9 years, and no one above the rank of housekeeper had troubled to learn her name. She was 39 when the story properly begins. A spare, plain, upright woman with ink-stained, weather-roughened fingers and a level gray gaze that could hold a straight line across a mile of field. Dark hair going early to gray beneath a plain cap. She had been born over her father's map office in the chalk town of Harbury and learned her whole trade before she could keep house. She held no office the family would have recognized, for a woman could be nobody in a great house, and drew no wage above an upper servant's. She was simply the person the estate room turned to when a rat-gnawed old plan must be fair copied so faithful that not a hedge was set a foot from its true place. And it was understood that whatever map Prudence Ashcombe could not draw true was not to be drawn at all at Wexcombe, short of sending to London. The morning the new Duke's great survey came home, she was in the estate room over a faded tithe map, and did not go up to see the grand new plan unrolled. "You'll not even come and look?" said young Alice Combe, the still room maid grown to a quick-handed under-clerk, hanging in the doorway with her cap askew and her cheeks red from running. "There's a map come up from London the size of a bedsheet, and men rolling it out on the great table like it was cloth of gold, and the famous gentleman himself, Mr. Fenwick, in a bottle green coat, telling his grace what a masterpiece he's made of the whole estate. They say it cost a sum that'd keep this house a year, and every field and fence and stone new measured to the very inch. Won't you come, Mrs. Ashcombe? He hasn't brought it home to be looked at by the woman who copies his old plans," Prudence said, without lifting her eyes from the pen. "And this worn tithe map will not fare itself while I stand in the estate room to be nodded past. Go and gawp, Alice, since you want it so, and mind you keep your hands behind you and don't finger anything, for famous gentlemen or no. They'll blame the copying desk first if aught's smudged. They say the gentleman's the greatest land surveyor in all England," Alice went on, undeterred, twisting her apron. "That the finest estates send for him before they'll move so much as a gatepost, and he can tell you the acreage of a parish by the look of it. Cook says his grace means to hang the new map framed on the estate room wall for all the county to see how grand Wexcombe's grown." "Cook says a great deal," said Prudence, "and has never yet stretched a chain across a wet field. A judge of land, if he's a true one, knows the smell of a rigged measure in his own hands, and not only his eye, for the eye is easily pleased and the ground never lies. Or he's no surveyor at all, but a fine coat with a loud voice, and either way it's no affair of ours. Now hold your noise, you'll spoil my figures. 2 chains, 40 links. 2 chains, 40 links." Alice went, disappointed, and Prudence finished her faded map and did not think about the new Duke's great survey, or told herself she did not. He was the old Duke's second cousin, come into a title and an estate he had never looked to have, and his grief was the business of his conscience and his God, and no concern of a woman who would never exchange a word with him from this day to the day she died. She was wrong about that, as it happened, but not for 9 days. In those 9 days the household learned its new master sidelong in scraps carried down to the estate room. He did not bluster. That was the first thing they said of him, and they said it uneasily, for a blustering master can be managed. But a quiet, exacting one keeps his own counsel. He rode the whole demesne every morning, alone, and came away with a face like a shut book. He had set himself to put right everything a careless line of owners had let go to ruin. The drains choked, the timber felled and unreplanted, the boundaries let slide and squabbled over, so the name of Wexcombe should stand again as it had stood. It was a proud grief and a lonely one, and it made him easy prey, though no one was near enough to say so. On the 9th day, the Duke's own man came down to the estate room and asked for her by the name the household used, which was not quite her own. His name was Dunmore, a lean, grave, spare person of perhaps 55, who had been body servant to the old Duke and then to this one, and had the still watchfulness of a man who had spent 40 years in great houses, seeing everything and saying almost nothing. He stood in the doorway with his hands folded and looked round at the ranked map drawers and the pinned old plans, and then at her, as she straightened from the copying slope with a pen held clear of the ink. "You are the woman they call Ashcombe," he said, "the one that copies the maps no one else can copy true. I am Sir Prue Ashcombe." "I have a thing to ask you," said Dunmore, and the grave voice went low. "That is not my place to ask, and that you had best forget if it comes to nothing. His Grace has bought a great survey, a new map and enclosure plan of the whole estate, from Mr. Fenwick of London, the most famous surveyor in the kingdom, who has certified under his own hand that every measure is true. He means to enclose upon it, and show the county that Wexcombe is Wexcombe again." Dunmore paused. "I have served in houses 40 years, and know just enough of maps to know I know nothing. But I stood by while that grand plan was unrolled, and there was a thing about it I did not like, and dared not say, being only a valet. So I have come to ask you, will you look at it before His Grace moves a single stone upon it and sets the whole estate by a lie?" Prudence set down her pen. "Mr. Dunmore," she said carefully, "I copy the household plans, and there's no secret in that. But that survey is His Grace's own great commission, certified by a famous gentleman, and it is not my place to walk into the estate room uninvited and finger a map worth a farm and be blamed for whatever's found in it. A servant that says her master's been cheated of his own land had best be very sure, or she's a slandering fool turned off without a character, and I'm too old and too poor to be a fool for sport." "The famous man that certified it," said Dunmore, "made his measures in a fortnight, with hired chainmen who marked what he bid, and told His Grace what His Grace wished most to hear, that the name was restored, that the estate was greater than he had dared to hope, that the sum was well spent. That is what a famous man is paid to do. He confirms the thing his customer has already fallen in love with, and will not have his own figures checked by a plain, honest hand, for his word is his trade, and his word has been bought. You I am told to trust. Will you come, or will you not? You are told to trust me by whom? By the housekeeper that says you found the drain wrong marked on the old plan a year before any flood proved you right. By the last steward, God rest him, that would let no hand but yours redraw the home farm bounds. By old Harbury folk that still speak of Ashcombe the surveyor and the girl he raised to read the ground better than himself before the profession broke him. I asked who in this house could look at a map and tell you true what it was, and every finger pointed the one way. I am an old servant, Mrs. Ashcombe. I have learned to go where the knowing is, and not where the fine coat is. The knowing is here, in this room, in you, and not in any certificate from London. Now, will you come? I'll come, she said, but I'll read that map my own way, against the true old plans this estate still owns, and against the ground itself, and not against a gentleman's word, for that's the whole trick of it. A false survey pleases the eye beautifully. It's the measure it can't answer for. I'll want the old parish tithe map and the last honest survey the family kept, laid in a good north light beside Mr. Fenwick's grand new one. Set the true beside the doubtful in daylight, and a stolen rood has nowhere left to hide. But I'll not do it in a corner, for a thing done in secret can be called a spiteful lie after. I'll do it in the open, where His Grace himself may watch every figure I check, and see which map answers to the ground and which only pleases the eye. You shall have all of it, said Dunmore, and I'll carry the old tithe map and the estate books up from the muniment room myself before the house is stirring. That will not be necessary yet, said Prudence, reaching for the worn field book that had been her father's, and the little boxwood scale rule worn smooth with use, where they lay in the drawer among her pens. Say nothing to Mr. Fenwick of why I'm sent for, nor to the land agent, for a man who has sold a false measure will sell it harder the moment he smells an honest eye upon it. Lead on, Mr. Dunmore, and let there be a good north light in the estate room, for the truth of a plotted line wants clean daylight, and dies under a candle. The great estate room at Wexcombe ran the whole north front of the offices. A bright high room of tall windows and polished oak hung the length of it with the maps of the demesne and, new upon the end wall, the grand survey Mr. Fenwick had made, glowing in the morning light like a window of colored glass. Every field washed a soft green. The boundaries ruled bold and the acreages lettered fair. And Prudence had copied in that room 100 times in 9 years, and never been asked her opinion of anything grander than a torn parish plan. She went to it now, and stood a long while before the new map, and did not touch it, and let her eye travel over it the slow way, from the bold title down to the margin where the figures were totted. "Who is that?" said a voice behind her, a low, level voice, quiet and exact, with no warmth in it and no unkindness either, only the flat control of a man who has taught himself to give nothing away. "Dunmore, who is this woman, and what is she doing at my survey?" She turned. The Duke of Wexcombe stood a few paces off in the estate room in a plain dark coat, his hands clasped behind him, a tall, spare, still man of perhaps 42, dark-haired, with a fine, austere face worn thin by a grief he did not show, and gray eyes that rested on her with neither disdain nor curiosity, but only a cool, closed wariness. The guarded stillness of a man who has been alone with a great sorrow and a great resolve, and does not care to be interrupted in either. "This is Ashcombe, your Grace," said Dunmore steadily. "That copies the maps. I asked her to look at the new survey. On my own head, and no fault of hers. Did you?" The Duke came closer, and looked at Prudence with the flat weariness of a man protecting himself with rank. "The plan copier. Dunmore has been below stairs finding me a critic of the mathematical arts. Well, mistress, have you come to admire my map? To tell me, as everyone in this house tells me everything, exactly what I should like to hear?" "No, your Grace," Prudence said. "I've come to read the ground." Which no one has yet done. That checked him. He had expected fright, or fawning, or the bright, empty praise people bring to a great man's new toy, and she had given him none of it. "Read the ground," he repeated. "A map, your Grace, is only as true as the measures it's drawn from. A man may rule a boundary bold, and letter an acreage fair, and wash every field a pretty green, and a gentleman's eye across a table will take its oath on it. But the measure it's drawn from, the angle it was turned, the chain that was stretched across the actual field, those a man cannot fake out of an inkpot. For they must answer to the real ground, and tell the true bounds of a thing, though every surveyor in London swears otherwise. A survey is a sum, your Grace, and a sum must close, the parts must add to the whole, and the lines must come home to where they started, or it is not a map, but a lie in the shape of one. It is slow and dull, and wants a person who has run the chain across the real fields till she knows the ground in her hands, and it is the one thing no one has troubled to do. And let your famous man be sent for to watch, so that no one may say, I found it in a corner where it could be doubted. You would have Mr. Fenwick watch you. The Duke's mouth was very still. The most celebrated surveyor in England, with the great estates of the kingdom for his clients, watch a woman from my estate room check the figures he has certified under his own name. I would have the whole world watch if the room were big enough, said Prudence. A false measure fears nothing but daylight and an honest eye. It thrives on a fine name and a locked drawer and a customer who wants to believe. It dies the moment a person who knows the true ground sets the map against the ground in the open. I want to read it aloud, in the light, until there is not a gentleman in England could look at the map in the field and call me a liar. Give me the survey and a clear north morning and a fine day for the fields, and let who will look on. For a long moment she thought he would send her back to her copying. Then something moved behind the closed gray eyes. Not warmth, but the flat, testing attention of a man who has just heard. From the last quarter he looked for it, a note with the ring of truth in it. You are very sure of yourself, he said, for a woman who has not yet laid a chain upon the ground. I am sure of the method, your grace. Not the man, said Prudence. Perhaps I'll run my chain across that ground and find every measure of it as true and exact as Mr. Fenwick swears, and I'll say so as plainly as I'd say the other, for I'll not miscall a man's work on a suspicion. But I grew up in the trade, and I know the true ground the way you'd know your own cousin's face, and there is something in that grand new map my eye will not let me love. The bounds run too far. The totals are too round, and the common that the whole parish grazed is drawn a deal smaller than any soul in Harbury knows it to be, and I mean to find out whether my eye is wrong or the survey is. Deny me, and you may keep your fine certificate and enclose upon it before the county, and I'll go back to my copying and say no more. For it's your estate and none of mine, and your name to stake and not mine. The Duke of Wexcombe looked at the plain gray-capped woman with the worn field book in her ink-stained hand for a long moment, in the bright estate room, with the dust turning gold in the great windows. Read it, he said. Tomorrow here, in this good north light, and in the fields after, and I will be present, and Dunmore, and Mr. Fenwick, whom I will send for tonight, for by God I will have the man who sold it answer to my face. If you are right, Mistress Ashcombe, I have paid a fortune for a lie, and was about to set the bounds of my whole estate by it, and I will owe you, and I do not like to owe. And if you are wrong, and slander a great man's name before my household on a plan copier's fancy, it will be on my head that I let you, and I will not forgive you. Do you understand me? Perfectly, your grace, said Prudence Ashcombe. Then we had best make certain I am right. Let me have the survey and the old tithe map tonight, and the chain and a dry morning for the disputed ground, and I'll have every measure checked by tomorrow's dusk, and lay it before you all where it cannot be doubted, or own myself mistaken, which I have done before and lived. She was right. It is worth saying plainly, because the household did not believe it for a month, and the Duke did not believe it for longer, that she was simply, unglamorously right, in the way that competence is right. She spent the last of that day's light over the map, laying the grand new survey against the old tithe map and totting the figures in the margin herself, and she rose before dawn and went out with the brass chain and Dunmore to hold the far end, and ran the ground itself across the 3 disputed closes and the great common of Harbury Down, link by link, in the cold, clean light of a spring morning. And by the next dusk she had it, not a suspicion, but a thing as hard and plain as a broken axle, patient, expert theft. A survey rigged to swell a grieving man's rent roll by quietly eating the common and the oldest tenant holdings, every rood of it certified true, in the same fine, confident hand. The great estate room at Wexcombe was bright and high and full of the clean north light of a spring morning, and they were all there when she came in with her father's field book under her arm and the brass chain coiled in Dunmore's hands behind her. The Duke stood at the end, still enclosed. Mr. Cornelius Fenwick stood beside his great map, plump and exquisite in a bottle-green coat, with a superior indulgent smile, come down from London to see his masterpiece hung and collect the last of his fee. And the land agent, Mr. Rook, stood a little apart, a dry, sallow man who had brought Mr. Fenwick to his grace and taken, though no one yet knew it, a quiet consideration for the introduction and a quieter one for the roods the new bounds would add to the rent roll he managed, and he looked at Prudence coming in with her worn field book and her muddy chain, and something behind the careful face went very still and very cold. "Mistress Ashcombe," said the Duke, "you have run my ground. Say now, before us all, what you found, and let any man here fault it who can." Mr. Fenwick laughed, a light, cushioned, forgiving laugh, and spread his soft-ringed hands. "Your Grace, I confess myself charmed. A woman from the copying desk. It is very picturesque, and no doubt she letters a fair plan most beautifully. But, forgive me, my good woman, the science of the survey is not a thing one picks up over a tracing slope. It is the study of a lifetime. I have given my certificate, and my certificate, Your Grace, hangs in the first estates of the— Your certificate, Miss Fenwick, said Prudence, was made with your instruments in a fortnight. By chainmen you paid to go where you pointed. You did not lay your own chain along the old bounds, nor put your own level to the fall of the common, for your trade is your word and not your hands. I have done a different thing. I have run the ground itself." She spread her field book and the old tithe map on the long table and set her boxwood scale rule at her hand. "May I begin, Your Grace? It will take the better part of an hour, if every man is to see it with his own eyes. But at the end of it there will be no doubt left in this room, and that is worth an hour of anyone's morning." "Begin," said the Duke. She began. And here is the thing that undid Cornelius Fenwick and turned the bright estate room by degrees to silence. She did not accuse, and did not flourish, and raised her voice not at all. She simply showed them the measures. She laid the corner of the great new map beside the corner of the old parish tithe map and said, plainly, here is Harbury Down as His Grace's new survey draws it, and here the same common as the tithe map drew it 40 years since, that no man ever bought and could not rig. The old common runs from the Harbury Road to the beach hanger, 190 acres, as every soul in the parish has grazed it time out of mind. The new map stops it short at the spring and takes 90 acres of it into the home farm. A bold new boundary drawn straight across open down where there is not, and never was, a hedge, nor a bank, nor a stone to mark one. It is a line inked in an office, Your Grace, and answered to by nothing on the ground. And she turned to the next, and did it again. She opened her field book to the pages of the morning's chaining and set them beside Fenwick's lettered acreages. The 3 closes below the church, Your Grace, that the map lets to your tenants at your rent, I ran the chain along their old bounds this morning, from the true corner stone by the ford that is marked on the tithe map and stands there yet, and they measure a full third less than your new survey swears. The chain is a chain, your grace, 66 feet, 100 links, the same in a lord's field as a laborer's, and it does not care whose land it lies on. Where the map says 40 acres, the ground says 27. The other 13 were not measured. They were inked. And last she came to the totals in the margin, the plain, unregarded sum at the foot of the plan that no one ever checks, where the honest truth of a survey lives. And she laid her scale rule along the boundary and totted the parts against the whole, and said very quietly, "And here, your grace, is the thing that cannot be argued at all. A survey is a sum, and a true sum closes. Add every field and wood enclose on this map as Mr. Fenwick has lettered them, and the parts come to 1,100 acres and more. But the whole demesne, measured round its outer ring fence, which is fixed, and old, and cannot be moved without moving the whole parish, has never been above 940 acres since the tithe was set. He has drawn 200 acres that do not exist inside a boundary that has not grown an inch, and no honest survey on earth fails to close by so much. Whoever made this made the inside bigger than the outside will hold, and the sum betrayed them at the margin, where they never thought a great gentleman would trouble to add it up. For great gentlemen look at the pretty green fields and never at the plain honest total that has to come home. And so, your grace, she said at the last, laying down her father's field book and her boxwood rule on the old tithe map, it comes to this. This is not a true survey of your estate. It is the work, and very fine work, of some clever rigging hand, made to look exact and to swell your rent roll by quietly eating the common your tenants graze and the roods that were their fathers before them. I cannot tell you whose office inked the lie, but I can tell you it was a lie, for the chain and the tithe map and the sum all three say so with one voice, and the ground knows neither how to flatter nor how to lie. The great estate room was very quiet. Mr. Fenwick had stopped smiling, the soft ringed hands gone still at his sides. The Duke stood looking at the two maps, the bold false and the faded true, as though she had laid a live coal upon his table. Mr. Rook's dry sallow face had not moved, but the careful eyes had gone flat and fixed. "This is," Fenwick began, and the cushioned voice had a thin edge in it now that had not been there before. "Your Grace, this is grotesque. A serving woman, a tracer of plans with a head full of Chalktown gossip, has spent a morning stumping about the wet fields with an old chain and spun you a fairy tale of theft out of the ordinary honest differences of measure. For no two men chain a field alike, and the tithe map she leans on was made by some hedge parson 40 years gone, with an instrument not fit to measure a garden. And she has taken the natural variance of the craft and, not understanding it, cried theft. It is the error of the half-taught. She knows a little of chaining and nothing of the science, and a little knowledge, sir, is the mother of exactly this kind of confident nonsense. You have it backwards, Miss Fenwick, said Prudence, very quietly, and for the first time she looked full at him. It is not the tithe map I lean on for the acreage, it is the ring fence that you did not draw and cannot move, and the outer sum that must come home. Two chainmen may differ by a rood on a rough close, they do not differ by 200 acres on a whole estate. I have not cried theft at the small difference, I have cried it at the sum that does not add. And I have not asked this room to take my word for it. It is all here on the table, the chain and the field book, and the tithe map and the total, for any hand to check and any eye to add. Send for another surveyor, sir, and set him to run that common and add that margin, and not one will read it different from me, For the length of a chain is a fact and not an opinion, and a sum either closes or it does not. You have not answered one thing I have shown. You have only told this room that a woman cannot know it. That is not a rebuttal, sir. That is a man with nothing left to say. You are very free, said Fenwick, and the exquisite polish had curdled clean out of him now, and something small and frightened showed through where it had been. For a house drudge that a word from me could see turned out into the road. Do you know, your grace, what becomes of the great surveys of England if it is once put about that a serving woman may overrule a licensed surveyor? Do you know what I might? I have a fair idea, Mr. Fenwick, said Prudence. You may have his grace turn me off this hour, without a character, and at my age that is very near a sentence of the ditch, and I dare say you know it. And I find, on the whole, that I would rather be turned off for reading the truth of this ground than kept on for holding my tongue, while an honest master enclosed his own tenant's common on a rigged map, and thanked the rigger for his fine name. So there it is. I've run the ground. What his grace does with the reading is between him and his own eyes, and I'll trouble neither any further than he wishes. For a long moment the room hung on the edge of it. Then the Duke of Wexcombe spoke, and his voice was very quiet and very level, and it was not at Prudence that he looked. Mr. Fenwick, he said, you are the most celebrated surveyor in England. You have now heard this woman run the chain and add the margin against the true old plans of my own estate, which you did not trouble to do. So I will ask you one plain thing, for I am done with fine ones. Take up her field book now, before us all, and lay your own rule along that ring fence and add me the whole to the parts, and tell me to my face, does this survey close, or does it not? Do the fields you have lettered fit inside the boundary I have owned these 2 years, or do they not? And Cornelius Fenwick looked at the field book and at the boxwood rule lying upon the old tithe map, and he did not put out his soft-ringed hand, because he did not dare, because he knew as well as she did what the sum would say. And the silence of his not daring went round the bright room like a cold draught, and was a plainer confession than any words. He had built a life upon his instruments and his word, and a plain woman had asked him to add up his own figures, and he could not, and everyone in that room saw it. I will not be catechized, he said at last, thickly, by a servant, over a table of rags and mud. My certificate stands upon my reputation, and my reputation is— Your reputation, sir, said the Duke, has just declined to add up its own map. I have my answer. And he turned from Fenwick as though the man had ceased to be in the room, and looked instead at Prudence. Mistress Ashcombe, if you are right, and it seems past doubting now that you are, then I have paid a fortune for a lie, and near enclosed my own tenant's common and set the bounds of my whole estate upon a theft before the whole county, and did not think to ask the one person under my roof who could have told me true, because she copied my old plans and I had never learned her name. Stay, do not go back to the copying desk. There is a whole estate here, mismeasured and disputed, that will want an honest chain field by field, and it appears there is only one such chain in England within my reach. Will you do it? I'll do it, your grace, said Prudence Ashcombe, gathering her father's field book and her muddy chain. It will take the season to run the whole demesne honestly, and set down plainly what each field and close and common truly measures. But it can be done by anyone with the patience to run the ground and refuse to be dazzled by a fine name. I'll give you back your estate's true bounds, your grace, the honest smaller ones the map would have swelled, and your tenants their common again, and you'll have less on paper and more in truth, which is a fair bargain, though it costs a fortune to learn it. Cornelius Fenwick went out of the great estate room with the ruin of his exquisite manor hanging off him like a wet green coat, and did not look at Prudence as he passed, and Rook went out a pace behind him, dry and sallow and saying nothing, already reckoning how much of his own part might yet be kept covered. And Prudence stood in the clean north light with her father's field book in her hand, and thought, with a strange calm, well, that is done. The truth is out of the ground and cannot be inked back over. She was wrong about that too, and this time for the rest of her life, for she did not go back to the copying desk. She was given the whole estate to run and set right, and through the long bright spring and summer she worked her way across the demesne with her chain and her level and her field book, and the Duke came out in the gray of the morning and the gold of the evening, and asked her questions, and stranger yet, listened to the answers. And by degrees so small, neither marked the moment, they fell into the strangest intimacy either had ever known, that of two solitary people bent over the same exact, honest work, where rank thins to almost nothing, and a grieving man cannot go on pretending the woman saving his inheritance is beneath his notice. His name, she learned, was Julian. Not that she ever called him so, but she learned it, as one learns things at a shared task in the early dark, along with a great deal else he would never have told a fine lady across a drawing-room. "You do not flatter me," he said to her one evening, watching her drive a peg into the true corner of a close and sight along the chain to the next. He was leaning against a field gate, the low light plain on his still face. "In 2 months you have not once told me a disputed boundary is settled to spare my feelings, nor a poor field good land because I own it, nor made a parade of the morning you rose in the dark to catch the theft. Everyone else on this estate tells me what will please me. Why do you not?" "Because you'd know I was lying," Prudence said, "and so would the ground. A false measure thrown to please you throws out every true one I might give you after it. For once you've caught me shading one figure to flatter you, you can never trust I'm not shading the next. And a man doesn't want his acres called more than they are. He wants to know what he truly holds, so he can act on it. Half this estate is honest good land and worth the improving, and half is neglect in your cousin's careless keeping, and you'll not know which is which by being told it's all splendid. Take it or leave it." "Your cousin's careless keeping," he said. "You are very plain." "I am always plain," said Prudence, "when the thing is plain. It saves everyone a deal of trouble, and the estate a deal of money, and you a deal of rigged surveys." He almost smiled. Then she saw the corner of the still mouth move, the first time she had seen anything like it, and Prudence Ashcombe felt something turn over in her chest that she had thought too old and too plain and too sensible to feel, and she put it away at once, firmly, the way she carried a doubtful measure to be run again in the morning and not brooded over now, and went on sighting her chain. "They are afraid of me," he said to her one gray afternoon, both of them in the estate room while the rain ticked at the tall windows and the fields were too wet to run. "Every soul on this estate. I say a boundary is settled, and Rook agrees before the words are out of my mouth. And yet you never once flatter me. Even Dunmore, who is honest with me a little, has served my family 40 years and has his place to think of. Why do you not?" "Because Dunmore has something to lose by you, and I've nothing," said Prudence. "A field book and a pair of hands that know the ground and the good name of Ashcombe in Harbury Town, and not one of those is in your gift to give or take. A person who wants nothing from you, your grace, is the only one in the world who can afford to tell you the truth. You do well to keep one about you always. They're worth more than the most famous surveyor in England, and a deal harder to come by, and they don't send a bill." And she went to fetch the estate books, and did not see the look on his face as she crossed the room, which was the look of a man quietly turning over a judgment he had thought long settled. They talked, in those weeks, more than either had talked to another living soul in years, and one gray afternoon, staring at the rain, he told her the thing he had told no one. "I was never meant for any of this," he said. "I was a second cousin, 3 lives from the title, and told myself I did not envy the man who had it all. And then he took a fever after a soaking on his own river, and was dead in a week before I could reach the house, and I came home to a great name half ruined by careless keeping, and could not bear that the world should say Wexcombe had come down. So I set out to put it all right, and fast. And because I wanted so badly to believe the estate greater than it was, I believed a smiling man in a green coat, and never asked the one soul on my staff who could have read the ground for me." "And why is that, Your Grace?" Prudence asked, quietly, not looking up from the rent roll she was checking, because she had learned that men say the truest things when they are not being looked at. "Because the ones who come close are generally after something," he said. "The place, the money, the name. I learned it young, being the poor cousin, whom people were civil to only for what the family might one day do for them. It is easier to keep everyone at arm's length and know why they smile at you than to let them near and always be wondering." He looked at her. "But you will not take my money above your wage. You argue with me. You told me to my face that my own grief-blind hunger let the theft in, and did not soften it. You are the first person in 20 years who has cost me nothing to be near, and I do not know what to make of you at all." Prudence set down her pen, and for once did not have a quick, plain answer ready. "I'll tell you what to make of me," she said at last. "I'm a woman who found out young she had one thing worth having, that I could take the ground in my hands and read its whole truth in it, and never be gulled. Not beauty, you can see I've none. Not a fortune, my father died a bankrupt with his instruments seized. Only that. And a person built entirely out of the one thing that can't be faked. For the ground cannot be flattered. Loses the very trick of shading a figure to please a great man, not out of courage, out of long practice at the opposite. I'm only a woman who tells the truth, because it's the single thing I was ever good at, and I've grown too proud of it to give it up." The Duke was silent for a long time. "You are the richer of the two of us," he said at last, "and always have been. And that is the joke the world has kept from me my whole life." "The world keeps that joke from most great men," said Prudence, taking up her pen again. "It's not kind to spoil it for them. They don't thank you. Now go into your dinner, Your Grace, for you've stood at that window since noon and think I've not noticed, and a man that forgets his dinner reads his acres crooked by candlelight." For the household had begun to feel the change, and it pleased them less than it pleased her, since it upset the order of things they leaned upon, and Prudence felt the small silences when she passed. "They think I'm reaching above myself," she said to Dunmore one morning, the two of them going over the true plans. "Mrs. Paget and the rest. They think I've got notions. Now I've the run of the estate and His Grace's ear." "They think," said Dunmore, looking up with his still grave eyes, "what small people always think when they see one of their own singled out, that it must be by some trick, since it can't be by desert, for if it were by desert, then any of them might have earned it and did not, and there's no thought less comfortable than that one." He looked at her kindly. "Pay it no mind, Mrs. Ashcombe. You've saved an honest name from being staked on a theft and a whole parish its common, which the most famous man in England either could not or would not do. If the house can't bear the sight of that, the fault's in the house, and in Rook, who brought the rigor in, and has his own reasons to wish you'd never touched the chain. That's a handsome thing to say, Mr. Dunmore, and I thank you for it. But it's easy for you. You're the Duke's own man, and above the house. Your standing's not among these people, so you don't mind losing it with them. No more, I think, said Dunmore quietly, is yours any longer, though it's not my place to say so, and I'll not say it again. And he took up his plan and went back to it, and left Prudence standing in the bright estate room light with a feeling that was not quite fear and not quite hope, understanding for the first time that she stood now between two worlds and belonged wholly to neither. A lonely place to stand, and one that would grow lonelier before it grew otherwise, if it ever did. The break, when it came in the servants' hall over the bread and cheese of a wet noon, and it came from Mrs. Paget, the housekeeper, who had been swelling toward it for a fortnight. I'm sure, said the housekeeper, to the room at large but at Prudence in particular, in the voice of a woman who is not sure at all and means everyone to know it, I'm sure it's a fine thing to be so very thick with his grace. A tracer of maps. That came out of a bankrupt map office with the bailiffs at the door. A fine thing. I only wonder that some folk find the time for their own proper work, with all this parading up and down the great fields being consulted like a lady. There's a press of old parish plans a fortnight overdue for copying that I hear no one's touched. But there, some of us keep grander company now. The room went still. The maids studied their bread. Prudence set down her knife. The old parish plans, she said quietly, I copied and drawered away on Tuesday, Mrs. Paget, the whole press of them, and left the tracings on the drying rail, as you'd know if you'd looked there instead of at me. I've not missed a day's work in this house since the survey fell to me. If I had, you'd have had it round the whole servants' hall before the kettle boiled. So let's have the true grievance, and not the parish plans, for the plans are done and we're neither of us fools. The true grievance, said Mrs. Paget, coloring, is that you've got above yourself Prue Ashcombe, and the whole house sees it but you, being sent for by his grace, being asked your opinion as if you were quality, as if all my years of keeping this household decent counted for nothing against a woman that pokes at old maps with a bit of boxwood and drags a chain through the mud. It isn't fitting. It isn't your place, and when it ends, as end it must, it's this hall you'll be crawling back to, and I only hope you'll not have made yourself too fine for the company you'll be glad enough of again. It was said in spite, but there was fear under the spite, the old, deep fear of the below-stairs world, that one of its own, singled out, will forget the rest, and that the order which shelters them all will crack. Prudence heard the fear under it, and it took the anger out of her, and she answered the fear and not the spite. I've not forgotten one soul in this hall, she said, and I'll not, whatever comes. I ran the ground of your own sister's cottage garden when she went to law over her boundary, Mrs. Paget, true and free, and got her back the strip the neighbor had crept over, and never charged you a word of thanks for it. If his grace asks my reading of a piece of ground, I give it, for it would be dumb insolence to hold my tongue when I know the answer. But I didn't seek it. I looked at that survey because Mr. Dunmore begged me, and no other soul could read it, and I'd have done as much for the poorest cottager cheated of a perch of garden. You may call that above myself, if you like. I call it my trade. And I'll thank you not to make out that 9 years of keeping this estate's maps true was poking at old paper. For there's not a rent you've drawn, nor a bound you've leaned on, that my chain and my pen didn't keep straight under your feet. There was a silence. Then old Truan, the under-butler, who spoke perhaps once a season, said gruffly into his mug. She ran the line for my brother's allotment when the steward would have docked it, and got him his full quarter-acre, and never told a soul I'd asked her. And a young housemaid down the bench said, and she copied the plan for my mother's poor bit of freehold when the lawyer wanted 3 guineas to do it, and never breathed a word to Mrs. Paget nor anyone. And Mrs. Paget, outnumbered by the plain memory of the room, went red and then white and stumped out into the wet, and did not speak to Prudence for a fortnight. And then, being not a bad woman, but only a proud and frightened one, made it up over a mislaid storeroom key, with no word said on either side, which is how such things are mended in a servants' hall. But the exchange had cost Prudence something, and she carried it to the estate room that afternoon in her face, and the Duke, who by now read her as closely as she read his ground, saw it at once. "Something has happened," he said, straightening from the window. "Below, in the hall. Tell me." "It's nothing, your grace. A servants' hall squall. It's mended, or mending. It is not nothing. You have the look you had the first morning at the survey, the look of a woman who has stood her ground and been bruised for it. Tell me who has been unkind to you in my own house, and you'll do nothing," she said sharply. And then, gentler, "You'll do nothing, your grace, if you've any care for me at all. Do you not see it? If you take my part in that hall, you make it true. You make me the woman who has the Duke's ear, who need only murmur, and a housekeeper of 30 years is turned off. You'd ruin me with the kindness. The only way I keep my place among them is to fight my own battles at my own table, and win or lose them on my own account, as one of them, and not as your favorite." She said the word as though it were a rigged figure. "Let me be, your grace. I've faced down harder rooms than a servants' hall. This one I can manage, if you'll only keep your hands off it." He looked at her a long moment, and something in his still face was working. "Why do you run from my favor as though it carried the plague?" She set down her field book. "Because a lord's favor is the plague, to a woman like me. A great man takes a fancy to raise a servant, and the day the fancy passes, and it always passes, she's left with the hatred of everyone she was raised over, and no place in any world. I swore long ago, watching fine words ruin my father, that whatever I got I'd get by my own hand and hold by my own right, so no man's changing mind could take it from me. My chain is mine, my knowledge is mine, the good name of my work is mine, and no one can ungive it. Those are the only things truly safe, and I'll not trade them for your favor, which is here today, and married to an heiress by this time 12-month. She stopped. "Forgive me, I speak too plain." "No," said the Duke, very quietly. "No, you speak exactly plain enough. You always have." And he said nothing more that afternoon about defending her, and let her go to her fields when the light held, but he stood long after at the tall window in the dusk, turning over the words, "married to an heiress by this time 12-month," and finding, to his own alarm, that the picture they made, of himself across a fine table from a pale, well-bred lady who would tell him his acres were all splendid because she had never once walked them, filled him with a flat gray dread he could not at first account for, and then could account for all too well. Cornelius Fenwick was not so easily done with as a man caught out ought to be. The Duke, with no love of scandal upon his new name, had not yet made the fraud public, and Fenwick, with a great reputation to save, spent that spring not in shame, but in building a defense. And his defense was not to deny the ground. The ring fence and the failed sum were past denying, and he knew it. But to deny the woman, to have the serving drudge who read the theft shown a spiteful, half-taught liar, so no client of his need ever believe her again. And in this he found ready allies, the land agent Rook, terrified of exposure, and the housekeeper Mrs. Paget, who nursed a grievance ripe for the using. Fenwick came in the last week of June, when the estate was near rerun and the rigged map rolled away in the muniment room, and he came not humbly but in a fury dressed as injured innocents, in a hired chaise with a sharp, cheap attorney beside him, resolved to fight where it would do most harm, in the open before the household and the tenantry, where a plain woman might be shouted down by a great name. He swept into the estate room, past the servants and tenants Rook had gathered over the setting out of the true new bounds, to where the Duke himself stood with Dunmore before the newly drawn map of the restored common. And Fenwick, seeing the room full and the Duke arrested mid-floor, chose, being the kind of man he was, to fight before an audience. "Your Grace," he said, loud and rolling, sweeping off his hat, a whine of injury dressed as boldness, "I come for justice. I have been these 2 months a slandered man, my certificate cried down before the whole world, and on whose word? On the word of that woman there." And he flung out a ringed hand at Prudence, who had come to the estate room with a rolled plan under her arm and stopped dead, a tracing drudge that no surveyor in England would take on as a chainman, an ignorant spinster who knows no more of the science than my horse, and who, out of spite and envy of her betters, has cried theft upon a survey that has satisfied the greatest eyes in the kingdom. Who ever gave a serving woman leave to overrule a licensed surveyor? I demand that she be turned off your estate before she poisons it further against every honest professional in it." "That's God's truth, Your Grace," said Mrs. Paget thickly, from the side of the room, not meeting Prudence's eye. 30 years I've kept this household, and never seen the like of a plan copier set up over trained gentlemen from London. It's not fitting. It's not right. Mr. Fenwick's a great man, known everywhere. There's 2 sides to every tale, and we've only ever heard the one. She might have borne it in silence. She had borne a great deal in silence over 39 years. But the Duke had drawn breath to speak, and she saw in his face that he meant to defend her, to throw his newly inherited name and all his authority before his whole household and tenantry on a plan copier against a famous man and his lawyer, and she could not let him, for it would cost him more than it saved her. A great man may keep an eccentric servant. He may not be seen to stake his honor on one against the most celebrated surveyor in England, not without a whisper following him ever after that his plan copier had bewitched him. She saw all this in the half-second before he spoke, and made her second life remaking decision as plainly as the first. So Prudence Ashcombe laid her rolled plan over the back of a chair and folded her ink-stained hands in front of her gray gown, and defended herself. "Mr. Fenwick," she said, and her voice was not loud, but it carried the length of the bright room, because it did not shake. "You say I am ignorant. I never claimed to be a licensed surveyor, and I could not show you a paper from any London society, nor charge a great estate a great fee for my name. I claimed one thing only, to know the ground and the chain and the sum. And a sum is not an opinion, sir. It is a made thing, with a chain and a boundary and a total behind it. And those are facts, and facts do not care whether the person adding them wears a green coat or a gray apron." She took a step into the room, and Cornelius Fenwick, to his own surprise, took one back. "You say I cried theft out of spite," she went on. "Then send for other hands than mine. Send for any honest surveyor in England, and let him run that common and add that margin and lay the chain along the ring fence. For I have here," and she drew from under her arm the old parish tithe map, foxed and folded, the parish's own tithe survey, sworn to before the commissioners 40 years since, that sets down the true bounds of every common enclose in Harbury, and no living man can argue with a sworn tithe map older than the theft it condemns, nor with a boundary that will not hold the acres inked inside it. Lay it before 10 honest surveyors, and set them to run the ground, and not one will read it different from me. That is the whole terror of the truth of the ground. To a man who has sold a lie, it does not need me. I found it, but I am not it. You have come to put out the one eye that troubled to look, before it teaches the others to see. And you are too late. The silence in the great room was total. The summer light lay clean and gold along the polished floor, and the dust hung in it, and no one moved. Cornelius Fenwick had gone the color of tallow. He opened his mouth and shut it, and looked for the first time directly at her, and what he saw in the plain gray-capped face was not ignorance and not spite, but certainty. The terrible flat certainty of someone who is holding the truth and knows exactly how heavy it is, and exactly how many honest surveyors in England can now be sent for to lift it beside her. His attorney, a sharp man who had come down on a rich brief and now smelled, all at once, a hopeless case, and a client who had lied to him, leaned and murmured something urgent in his ear, and Fenwick's tallow face went a shade grayer. "This is," said Fenwick, and the roll had gone thin as water. "This is a conspiracy. A pack of Chalktown chainmen, jealous of their betters, will say whatever a spiteful woman of their own kind desires. No gentleman's court would credit a parish of hedge surveyors against the certificate of. Then you've nothing to fear from the surveyors, sir," said Prudence, "and no reason to want me turned off before they can be sent for." A man easy in his figures does not tremble when a plan copier offers to set his survey before the whole profession. He says, "Send for them, they'll clear me." I notice you've not said it. You came here to have me put out of this room before anyone else learns to add what I added in your map. You're too late, Missa Fenwick. His Grace has read it now, and Mr. Dunmore, and the household has seen you decline to add up your own margin. A confession the whole hall understood. And the ground itself, she nodded to the tall windows and the green fields beyond them, is the plainest witness of the lot, and will measure the same to the last honest chain in England as it measured to the first. I see, said Fenwick, and his voice had gone to a thread, that his Grace's house has been poisoned against a man of the first reputation. He shot a look at Mrs. Paget, who had gone gray and was staring at the floor, having grasped a beat too late that her ally was drowning and would pull her down with him. I'll not stay to be lectured on the science by a tracer of plans. Your Grace, I wish you joy of your plan copier. When she has cried down every honest surveyor in England and left you alone with a half-measured estate, you'll remember I warned you. My attorney will be in touch. Good day. He went. He turned on his heel and swept down the length of the bright room and out at the great door. His sharp attorney a half-step behind him, already talking low and fast about withdrawing from the brief, and the sound of the chaise driving off went up between the office walls and came back down. And Prudence Ashcombe stood in the enormous quiet with her hands folded and her heart going hard, and thought with a strange calm, well, that is done. Now I shall be turned off too, for a great house cannot easily keep the plan copier who shamed a famous man. She turned to the Duke to say something of the kind, to make it easy for him, to give notice before she could be given it. He was looking at her as though he had never seen her before. Mrs. Ashcombe, said the Duke of Wexcombe, and it was the first time in 9 years anyone in that house had put the Mrs. in front of her name and meant it as an honor. Will you come into the map closet where it is quiet? There is a great deal I find I wish to say to you, and I had rather not shout at the length of my own estate room in front of the tenants. She left the rolled plan over the chair and went with him into the small, warm closet at the room's end, where the estate's atlases and field books were kept. Mrs. Paget, by the wall, sat down heavily on the edge of a window seat, a woman who has bet her standing on the wrong man and knows it. Rook the agent slipped out at the far door and was, within the week, gone from the estate altogether. His part never openly named but perfectly understood. And Dunmore, at the Duke's heel, allowed himself the ghost of a smile, and then, being Dunmore, cleared the room of gaping servants and tenants with 3 low words and a look, so that whatever passed in the closet should at least pass unwitnessed. What passed in that small, warm room, that June afternoon Prudence never repeated to a living soul, and neither did he. And so it must be given here as the two of them alone knew it, which is to say plainly. He shut the door. The room was full of the low gold light of a summer afternoon, falling across the shelves of atlases and the one small window that looked down the home park, and Prudence stood in the middle of it, with her hands folded, and waited to be thanked and pensioned and sent away, and had her whole speech ready, how she would go without fuss, how she asked only a character that she might find another place that wanted a woman who could run a chain true. He offered her, first, money, a sum that made her sit down without meaning to. She refused it. He offered, next, to make her surveyor of the estate in name and in fact both, over any man in England, with a proper salary and rooms of her own and the freedom of the office for life. And this she did not refuse. But she did not answer either, because she could see in his face that it was not what he had brought her into the closet to offer, and that he was working his way toward the true thing by the road of easier things. "Your Grace," she said, when he had run out of easy things and stood at the little window with his back to her, silent, looking down at the summer park in the low light. "You're a plain-dealing man, when you let yourself be, and I've never known you a coward. Whatever it is you brought me in here to say, say it, for there's the last of the true bounds to peg out before the light goes, and I'd rather leave them for the truth than stand here for a speech that goes all round the field and never comes to the point." "Julian," she said then, more quietly. She had never used his name, and did not know she was going to, and the sound of it stopped him as though she had laid a hand flat on his chest. And he turned. "There, I've said it once, and the roof's not fallen. Now you say your piece, and I'll say mine, and we'll neither of us be cowards about it. For I'm too old to be courted round the houses, and you're too honest to enjoy the doing of it." So he said it, plainly, in the plain words they both trusted. "You stood in my estate room an hour ago," he said, "and you would not let me defend you. Do you know why that undid me, Prue, when nothing else in 20 years has? Because I saw what you were doing. You saw, quicker than I did, that if I spent my name on you, before the whole household and the tenantry they would say you had bewitched me, and you would sooner take the weight of that man's slander and be turned out onto the road than let it cost me my standing. A servant, with nothing, protected a duke, with everything, and meant to walk out of my life without letting me so much as thank her. And I stood there and understood that in my whole guarded life I have never once been loved by a person who wanted nothing from me, and that I was about to let her go." Prudence said nothing. She could not. "I am not offering you rank," he went on, and the level voice went for a moment unsteady. "Rank is nothing. It came to me over my cousin's grave, and brought me a half-ruined estate and a name I nearly staked on a theft in my hunger to make it shine. I am offering you the only thing I have found worth the giving, a partnership of equals in the plain sight of God, my name to yours. My judgment laid open to your plain sense every day we both live. Spend what's left of our days keeping me honest, for no one else alive is willing to try, and I cannot go back to being flattered. You have shown me the difference between being served and being loved, and a man cannot unsee that, and I will not have any woman in England but the one who taught it to me across a table of maps. Prudence Ashcombe was 39 years old, and she had prided herself her whole life on having no illusions, and she discovered in that little room that she had been nursing the largest illusion of all, the one that told her that a woman like her was not permitted, by God or the world, to be simply and fully loved for exactly what she was. There will be a great scandal, she said, when she could speak. There will, he agreed. A magnificent one. The dowagers of the whole county will take to their beds. I find I am looking forward to it. They'll say you married your plan copier. They'll say I trapped you, or bewitched you, or cried down an honest man's survey to make myself needful and creep from the estate room into your rooms. They'll say it of me till I die, and some of them after. You know they will. You've lived among them. You know exactly what they are. I do, he said. I know them to the bone. And I do not care a straw for the opinion of people I do not respect, upon a matter they cannot understand, concerning the only happiness I have ever been offered. They will say the Duke of Wexcombe married the woman who found the theft a famous surveyor could not, and gave a whole parish back its common with nothing but an old chain and the courage to add up a sum every clever man had trusted. Let them say it. It is even true. And he held out his hand to her, not a lord's hand offered to be kissed, but a plain hand offered to be taken, palm up, level, between equals. Prue, I have asked you a question. You have never in your life left an honest question unanswered to spare a person's feelings. Do not begin now. And Prudence Ashcombe, plan copier of Wexcombe, looked at the offered hand, and at the gray eyes that had learned, at 42, not to lie to her, and she gave him the truth, as she had given him nothing but the truth from the first morning, because the truth was the only dowry she had ever owned, and it turned out to be the only one he had ever wanted. Yes, she said, God help us both. Yes, they were married in the small gray parish church at the edge of the home park, quietly, in the last week of July, with the hay in and the whole scandalized county watching from behind its curtains, and not one of them invited. Dunmore gave the bride away, gravely, and thought his old careful heart would crack with the rightness of it. Mrs. Paget wept through the whole service, and when the plain vows were said, the little church was so still they could hear the rooks in the churchyard elms, and more than one hard old tenant, come to gawp and stayed to be moved, said afterward that the silence when the plan copier became the Duchess of Wexcombe was the silence of a whole small world quietly rearranging itself around a truth it had not seen coming. She never played the great lady, and never tried to. She wore good plain gowns and no jewels, and kept her father's brass chain and her own worn field book and boxwood scale rule in her writing table drawer, and went out over the estate most mornings as she always had, to keep its bounds true in her own hand, and turn away no tenant who brought a disputed line to be run. And Cornelius Fenwick, when word of the case spread through the London profession, found his certificate worth nothing, and his great clients gone, and ended his years small and shabby and disbelieved, which is a colder ruin than any prison, and the estate he had tried to swindle came under an honest chain, to be known as one of the truest mapped in England, the smaller for being real, and the greater for it. She trained clever young women under her, craftsmen's and tenants' grown daughters with quick eyes and no prospects, and taught them to run a chain and add a sum and read the true measure of land, and never be gulled by a fine word or a famous name. She and the Duke were seen, by such of the county as would still receive them, to be the most quietly contented couple in the shire, and his Grace, who had come into his tidal grief hollowed and shut as a locked room, had become a man at ease in his own skin, who could laugh and be argued with, and looked at his unlikely Duchess across their supper table as though he could not quite believe his own good fortune. And the county, which had come to sneer, came slowly and grudgingly to something else. For it is one thing to keep up a scandal about people you never see, and another about neighbors whose Duchess rides out in the wet to run a poor widow's boundary honest against a grasping neighbor, and takes no fee. The dowagers who had taken to their beds got up again, in time, and found the Duke and Duchess of Wexcombe could not be cut without cutting off the most open-handed house in the county, and one by one they came round. A few, the honest ones, came simply to say they had been wrong, and were received without a flicker of triumph, and given tea, which shamed them more than any reproach could have done. He lived another 30 years, the same span, she once remarked, that she had copied his maps unregarded, and died at last in his own bed, his hand in her ink-stained one and no stranger in the room. She sat with him at the end as she had sat with his rigged survey at the beginning, still and true, and told him the truth to the last, which was that he had been a great deal of trouble and worth every hour of it, and he laughed his quiet laugh one final time and told her she was the one true thing he had ever owned, and slept and did not wake, and she closed his gray eyes herself and did not weep until the door was shut, for she had always believed a person's grief, like the true measure of a thing, is their own, and not a matter to be shown off for onlookers. She outlived him by 6 years, and kept the estate's bounds true to the end, and was, by the time she followed him, so beloved across that whole broad reach of shire that they lined the lanes for her funeral 3 deep, tenants and craftsmen and the households of the women she had taught to run a chain and read the true measure of land, far more than ever lined them for any duke, and among them not a few of the fine folk who had once scorned her and lived long enough to be ashamed of it. And they carried behind her coffin, on a cushion, her father's brass chain and her own worn field book, which the whole shire agreed was a stranger honor than any crest, and no more than her due. There is an old saying among the surveyors of the chalk country that a great name may be inked upon a map, but the truth is measured in the ground. And the whole art of an honest survey is to know the one from the other. Prudence Ashcombe copied the maps at Wexcombe for 9 years before anyone above the housekeeper troubled to learn her name, and for 30 years after as its mistress, and never once called a false measure true to spare a great person's feelings. She was not saved by her meekness, nor by her beauty, for she had neither. She was saved, if saved is the word for the woman doing the saving, by the plain, unfakeable fact of what she knew, and by the courage to stake everything on it in a world forever dazzled by the famous name. And that was the whole of her, and it made her the truest measure in the county. The poor whose bounds she ran honest said it first, and the tenants after, and in the fullness of years even the great folk who had scorned her came to say it too, until it was less an opinion than a fact of the country, worn smooth with saying, that a plain gray-gowned woman with ink on her fingers had run her chain across a fortune of stolen roods, and read the lie in the very ground, and told nothing but that truth to a grieving duke, and it made her the truest measure in the county. And it was said of her, long after, whenever a proud man was flattered to his ruin or a wise woman overlooked for her plainness, said quietly, the way the truest things are said, that she had found with an old chain and a night's patience what a whole train of famous men had sworn was true and exact, and it made her the truest measure in the county. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from and what this story made you feel. And if it moved you, consider subscribing softly so you won't miss the next one.